Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. A humorist once said of this city, it'll be a great town when they get it finished. Well, they're working on it, building the 2nd Avenue subway, the 3rd water tunnel, East Side access for the Long Island Railroad, and a lot more. Each project has the same DNA, costing far more, taking far longer than promised. Why? Well, it's complicated. But my guest is an expert at unraveling complications. She is Maria Dulas of the Citizens Budget Commission, and you will meet her next. I'm happy to welcome to the program Maria Dulas. And I guess, first of all, we should tell the folks, what is the Citizens Budget Commission? What are you in business to do?
So the CBC is an organization with a long history in the city. It was founded in 1932 by business leaders who felt that there needed to be independent oversight of the city's finances and affairs. It was really a big enterprise, an important enterprise, too big to fail. And so since that time, CBC has become kind of the state's and the city's preeminent independent fiscal watchdog. So we monitor very closely the budgets and the finances of the city, the state, huge public authorities like the Port Authority and the MTA. And we also do reports on some of the policies to assess whether they're cost effectively delivering services for New Yorkers.
Well, it was because of your personally and professionally background in the CBCs in the areas that you talk about, that I wanted to have you here to chat about a couple of those agencies, at least at the beginning, the MTA, the Port Authority. And the idea that the big projects, what they like to call mega projects that we're all familiar with, routinely in this city and historically in this city are mishandled, over budget, costing 2, 3, whatever times as what they were promised, and taking far longer. Now, I know New York is not unique in this. We don't have this problem exclusively, but do you get the sense from your experience that it's more egregious here?
Yeah, there's been work that shows that a lot of these mega projects go over budget and take longer, across the world. And there's ample evidence of that. But it does seem that in New York, we have an especially big problem. We have mega projects such as East Side Access, such as the 2nd Avenue subway, such as the building of water filtration plants upstate that routinely cost twice as much and take years longer to deliver than promised. But it's not just the big projects. We've done some work looking at small capital projects and how they're delivered by New York City, and you find the same problems with those as well. And so it really points to some systemic issues in the way we undertake these projects all together.
And systemic, give us some examples. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I think,
built into the system.
You can start right at the beginning, which is the political difficulties of agreeing to what a project will be. And you can't kind of understate the importance of that. I mean, you take something like Willets Point redevelopment, for example, that was put on the table back when the Mets were supposed to get a new stadium. Well, the Mets are a couple of seasons into their play at Citi Field, but if you look around, nothing's been happening at Willets Point. The plans have been changed, political support has changed, with elections, there have been lawsuits. It is very hard to get stakeholder consensus on what the goals and scope of a project should be. And that accounts for a big amount of delay for projects right off the bat or even as they start to progress.
I was startled by one of your reports. It's several years old now, and maybe things have changed. But in that report, 2009, you guys looked into the MTA and discovered that the board of the MTA, the organization that runs our buses and subways and commuter lines, the board of the MTA wasn't tracking the projects in the 5-year, capital plan. Now, maybe it's changed, but as of 2009, they weren't doing that, and one wonders, well, what are they doing? Why are they there? What?
Right. It's the board's job in many ways is to review what's put before it and provide the status on the update. And, oftentimes, and I don't think this is unique to the MTA board, you sort of react to what's in front of you without necessarily maybe taking the step back to say, hey, looking back and looking at the track record and performance. I think since that report, there have been improvements. And notably, they're trying to do a better job of making this all public so others can look as well. So they've got a big capital projects dashboard that lists the major projects, their progress, how they're doing relative to the original estimate, as well as the timeline. But the question is, has this improved transparency necessarily improved performance? And I think the answer is not really.
Let's look at some of the MTA so-called mega projects. There was just news in the papers the other day about the Second Avenue subway and the latest bump in the road. Apparently the 72nd Street station for that subway is having problems and is behind schedule. The elevators, the escalators, the vents. Not unusual, is it?
No, I mean, there is, working underground is complicated. And what will happen is you will run into unforeseen site conditions. So that's to be expected, and I don't necessarily think that a private enterprise would be better able to tackle that. However, it goes again to sort of where you start. And a problem with a lot of these projects is that the scoping is not really thorough enough to give the public a credible estimate of what they will cost.
Let's talk about another project, MTA subway again. But this one, I mean, your point is well taken that working underground is a lot more complicated than building above ground. But here was the extension of the 7 line to 34th Street. And they did it, and they opened a station, and now we've been finding out, that station is leaking,
right,
and there's mold. But what is more concerning to me in terms of what we're trying to discuss is that these problems were known years ago.
Right.
As this was being planned and scoped out and then actually built. And one wonders, why wasn't it addressed, or what happened? You weren't there obviously, but from your
right,
oversight, can you tell?
It's hard to know exactly. As you say, it's really hard to be on the outside and figure out what exactly went wrong and when. I mean, but if you take a step back and look at that project, right? Here was a project that was going to extend the 7 line to the west side, spur development, which arguably it has.
Yes.
But in order to keep that project within cost, you had to sacrifice stations along the way, right? And now you get to sort of building it out, and you're trying to adhere to a cost estimate by sacrificing part of the work, by making other changes, but you're sort of perhaps reluctant to say, okay, well now we have to have change orders to address some of the ongoing issues. We'll just shift that later on into part of the maintenance expense.
Well, the reports had it that, I don't know if it was what's referred to as sealant.
Right.
But the subcontractor decided to use what I might call quickcrete.
Right.
I'm not sure what that is, but it sounds like a shortcut instead of the real stuff, and that may not
right,
be an accurate phrase. But and the board and everybody approved that, and apparently that's the problem.
It might have seemed sufficient at the time to address what the issue was, and now here we are, and it wasn't. Right? And I think it points to a larger problem with how we think about capital projects in the private sector, which is we isolate sort of the design and the construction of something from the maintenance and operation. And that's really the wrong way to do it, because you might cut corners here when you're building something and have to pay double or triple down the road to maintain and operate it. And so we've pushed for this sort of what's known technically as life cycle costing, thinking about a project from the design but also down the road 50 years from now for what it will cost to operate and maintain it credibly. And that leads to decisions and trade-offs, in the construction and design and the use of materials and how, whether you go for the wow factor to have something that's artistically or aesthetically pleasing versus something that's more functional and easier for the public sector to maintain. And when you separate it out like this, you may go for saving a few bucks on the construction side, which will ultimately be more costly down the road.
You mentioned earlier East Side Access as one of the major projects that's underway. East Side Access being the project to bring the Long Island Railroad to Grand Central Station, Grand Central Terminal. Again, that one is now costing out at about $11 billion, and they first said it was going to be $4 billion.
That's right.
And it's years behind schedule. Maria, if you had the power, if you were the dictator, and they said, "Okay, Maria, fix this. You can do it. Fix the problems with these agencies." So this kind of stuff doesn't happen, or at least is hugely minimized. So now you got all the power. What do you do?
Well, there are a lot of changes. I think first, you have to tamper public expectations about what they can expect from some of these big mega projects. And what I mean by that is there is a fundamental trade-off between spending funds to maintain and improve a system that the city relies on 24/7, powers the economy, versus some of these expansion projects. And I think there's a desire for the shiny and new, and there may be needs to improve capacity, but when you have a track record and such tricky field conditions that show that these projects go radically over budget, you have to start thinking a little bit outside the box from sort of expanding the system using new subway lines and building that kind of infrastructure. So managing public expectations is a big part of it. The second part is really doing better scoping to say, okay, we want a train, a rail car line, or we want an extension of service here. To do more thorough scoping before going to the public to say what the cost of a project will be. And yes, that involves spending some money up front. And I think the other two parts are even more complicated and sort of wonky. But there is a problem with how the state laws allow public sector agencies to undertake these contracts.
What are those problems?
So they're really in the procurement process. Right now, the traditional public sector procurement process, which was really a way to combat cronyism and corruption in the award of contracts, is to say, okay, we will design a project, we will get to the plan documents, and we'll bid that out and get a contractor to build it. And based on the bids that we have, we'll award the contract to the bidder who comes in at the lowest cost. Now, there's several problems with this. One is that you fundamentally separated two things, the design from the construction, that need to be more integrated. So to the extent that the builder and the architects and the engineers can communicate, you will have a feedback loop that is better at getting a credible design and a project built on time because you have that communication. The second is in the selection of the contractor. So you pick the one with the lowest bid. Now that person, or that firm rather, may be very well qualified and able to do the work, or they may have radically underestimated their ability to get it done and the cost. And so that leads to problems in the construction that then require a lot of change orders and other things to fix. So what seems like the lowest bid up front may not be down the road because the contractor may not be qualified.
So how does one, since you can't see the future, how does one guard against, how does the agency involved, whatever it be, guard against, company ABC was low bidder, we're going with them. How do you guard against the problems you're talking about? They may not be able to do the work for the amount that they bid in the time that they bid.
Right. So other states, other cities, and certainly the private sector are kind of well evolved in how they've thought about this. And the short answer is you integrate these functions more seamlessly. So one of the tools that's becoming kind of the standard, particularly in building projects, is called design build, where you award the contract to complete the design and construction to one firm or consortium that manages the process internally. But you don't need to go that far. You know, there are other models where you have a firm or a construction manager who has the oversight and is thinking about how all these pieces fit together.
We don't do it this way?
We're not, under the rules we have, only a few agencies at the state are allowed to use these tools. And certainly the MTA has been pushing for more of this kind of authority to be able to do this work, but also to extend it to the operation and maintenance pieces that I spoke of earlier. The other part is you want to think of other things besides the lowest cost to award the work. And that's what's known as best value. I mean, if you think about it, if you were doing work for your kitchen, you would ask the contractor to give you an estimate, but also ask for referrals, ask to see other work. You know, there would be more that goes into the decision besides just the cost. And so the public sector in this state needs the flexibility to be able to think and approach projects in that way. And it's really nothing revolutionary. Other states have been doing this, and they've been effectively delivering public infrastructure under these models for quite some time now.
And why can't we, I mean, you mentioned the laws that we have and what the foundation of those laws were, at least partially, to combat cronyism. Why can't we get past that? And if other states are doing it well, why can't we change?
Well, the politics of it seem to be a little sticky, and I think certainly there are fears on the side of labor that pursuing some of these more flexible models means that there will be less unionized work to do the labor. And, that's not necessarily true. I mean, we've seen that there's union labor on a project like the Tappan Zee, which is being undertaken with design build, and it's the sort of terms governing that are established in a project labor agreement, which is common in other places as well. So there are ways to accommodate the concern that you want, qualified union labor without necessarily having some of the restrictions that come with kind of the typical union work rules in some of these contracts.
Before we go further into what you as the dictator would be able to do and change, I want to underline a point you made, and our viewers may have missed it along the way, but a very important point. Our transportation system in this city, the subway principally, is the lifeblood, as you said, and it is consistently shortchanged in terms of maintenance.
Yeah.
And we see the results of that almost daily with trains backing up, with going out of service, whatever. Maintenance being shortchanged is an historic problem with the MTA. But the point you were making before is when these mega projects go off the rails, so to speak, that impacts, that has impact on being able to have enough money to do the maintenance. Am I making that connection?
That's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the MTA's capital plan now, about 20% of it, as it stands, is dedicated to these network expansions. Well, that's billions of dollars of a $26-27 billion capital plan that could be devoted to station improvements, to improving signal capacity, to improving the signal controls that allow trains to move more efficiently within the system and could potentially increase capacity. So those are very, very real trade-offs. And I don't think the public thinks about them in that way.
So one of the things you're saying then the CBC has said is maybe we should cut back a little bit on our on our vision for the bells and whistles and not build, all these things and put that money, fixing the signal systems and the rails and...
Right. I mean, if you think about how many thousand, I don't remember the numbers offhand, but how many thousands of people will be benefiting from a project like East Side Access, right? And you compare that to the millions who use the subway system or who generally use the Metro North and the Long Island Railroad. the trade-off suggests that you want to dedicate resources where there'll be the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people, and that would really be making the investments in improving the system we have. Again, there are some areas where there is necessary expansion needed, but the answer to that could be more simpler than building a new train line. It could be bus improvements, and they don't have to be sort of your traditional bus. I mean, I grew up in Queens riding the buses.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't my favorite thing to do when I needed to get around as a kid. But they have select bus service that's been done very well, express buses that also move a lot of people efficiently, and dedicated lanes for buses that could improve the experience significantly.
Well, to underline your point about thinking for the greatest number of people and providing, the other day we saw the report from the MTA that in 2015, the average daily ridership was 5.7 million. Weekday ridership, 5.7 million people on the subways, the most since Truman was president.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's a lot. That's a lot of people who really would like that system better maintained.
Yeah, it's been astonishing growth, and the other interesting part of it is it's not happening during rush hour. Not all of it is during rush hour on the weekdays. There's also been a sort of lot of off-peak travel growth on the commuter rails as well. So more people are using the system more frequently at different points in time as well.
What about the board members of these agencies? Should they all be fired? I mean, we don't. First of all, you talked about earlier about transparency. Public has no idea who the board members are.
Right.
Public probably has the sense that the board is overseeing all this and they're on top of it and they're making sure everything's going right. And all you need to know to dissuade you of that is look back to in New Jersey to that what they call traffic gate, when people in the Christie administration created a traffic jam at the George Washington Bridge, and we see the governor's appointees to the Port Authority in this case are essentially hacks and people who are there just because they were political supporters or whatever of Governor Christie. And I'm sure it's true on the New York side as well. Should we have these boards? What do we do about these boards?
It's hard to paint them all with a single brush. There's so many public authorities in New York State. It's sort of, we're unique in that regard, that so much of the work that we do in the public sector managing our public assets comes from public authorities. And some of them operate very well, and others fall victim to political tensions that theoretically having the boards of these public authorities, was supposed to insulate them from those kind of pressures. I think given the troubles at the Port Authority in particular, I think which is an egregious case of how this works out, there have been calls to kind of rethink some of that, and the governor had a proposal recently in his budget, which I think that was founded on what you're suggesting, which is the boards are not paying close enough attention, and that's part of the problem that these mega projects are going over. And so he suggested a construction board that would be an additional layer of oversight to these boards.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. He proposed it. There was a lot of blowback. I guess he got some of it in the budget. But I guess what I'm asking you at this point is, okay, so the governor says, hey, we need a better approach. We're going to create this design group overseeing them. Bottom line, is it in your view, in the view of the CBC, is this a useful idea? Or is it more bureaucracy?
Well, as it was presented in the budget, the CBC opposed the board because it had very far-reaching powers, including the power to dissolve contracts, which would really blur the lines of accountability for who's responsible for these mega projects. So the CBC opposed it. As it passed, as it was enacted in statute, the board sort of does not have the same teeth that that the governor proposed. And so its role is more advisory. It can question, it can recommend, and it can ask for responses as to why its recommendations were not adopted. So, it remains to be seen how this will play out in practice, whether it will be an additional layer of oversight that holds agencies accountable for overruns, or whether it's going to just slow the process further, because now we're going to have this feedback loop between this new construction corp and the Board of the Public Authorities going back and forth on what the particulars of contracts are.
I wanted to talk briefly, and we don't have that much time left, about capital spending in this city. We saw under Mayor Bloomberg a very ambitious plan called Plan NYC. And in short, it did a lot of good, and it came up short in other areas, and left us with a lot of debt.
Yes.
Just bring us up to speed on that. On what did they do right, what they do wrong, and the level of debt burden we have.
Yeah, I think Mayor Bloomberg, rightly thought that investment in infrastructure and in sort of some of these transformational projects, but the day-to-day, repaving roads, making expansions to the water system, pursuing the third water tunnel, were very important to the city's economy. He was a big capital spender in that he invested not only in these functions, but in other areas as well, in parks, in housing, in across the board. But the function of that was we paid for almost all of it with debt. And so the debt service has become a huge part of the operating budget now. And if it wasn't for the low interest rates in recent years, it'd be even bigger. The city has been refinancing some of this debt. So here we are, we've sort of seen improvements on the ground in schools. The conditions are a lot better, crowding is down, in park space, in a few other areas, but there's still obviously a lot of capital need and improvements that are still needed. This mayor has tinkered around with those priorities a little bit. He's investing more in transportation. He's still continuing a high investment in schools. He's also dedicating a lot of money towards housing to address what he sees as the affordability crisis.
And how are we coping? And it now falls to Mayor de Blasio, coping with all that debt.
Well, it's a big part of the budget. It's about 8% of the budget now as it stands, and it's going to continue to grow. It'll be growing by 40% in the coming years, or about 30% in the life of the financial plan. So, his response was to shrink the size of the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection capital plan, by taking out the third water tunnel, as we heard about, and a few other things, and to keep the water rates down that back that debt. But the answer is simply, we've been blessed with a good economy that continues to increase revenues, and more of our revenues are going to back the debt for these projects.
Well, Maria, it's a fascinating subject, and lest our audience think it's all out there in the ether and it doesn't concern them, you really need to stay tuned, because in terms of mega projects, the Port Authority, of course, is talking about major upgrades at LaGuardia and Newark airports. They want to build a new bus station in Midtown, and of course they're trying to do this rail tunnel under the Hudson River. So we probably will have a lot more to talk about as the months and years go by. I thank you for being here, Maria Dulas.
Pleasure.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.